Good morning. I'm Kim McCleary, President and CEO of the Los Angeles World Affairs Council and Town Hall. We are so thrilled to partner again with Writer's Bloc on this very special program. Our organizations are excited to welcome everyone joining us today. There are many of you from the Los Angeles and San Francisco regions, as well as viewers from across the United States and globally. We are looking forward to the conversation with technologist, business leader, and philanthropist Bill Gates on his new book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. Mr. Gates will be joined by climate change activist, philanthropist, and award-winning actor Don Cheadle as moderator. If you would like to submit a question to Mr. Gates, there is a question bubble on the right-hand side of your screen that you can click on to submit your question. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our program partner, a nonprofit with a mutual mission of civic engagement on critical global issues. President, CEO, and founder of Writer's Bloc Presents, Andrea Grossman.
Thanks so much, Kim, and thank you all for joining us here today with Bill Gates and Don Cheadle, international leaders in the fight against climate disaster. Bill is a visionary, and the Gates Foundation has given well over $50 billion towards international health and education initiatives. In his new book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, Gates raises the stakes. We can no longer call the looming threat climate change. It's climate disaster, as we see in Texas now and in California recently. And Bill Gates lays it all out clearly and succinctly about what we must do and how we must act now to avoid inevitable catastrophe from changing weather patterns that impact agriculture, infrastructure, and of course, human life. In his new book, he admits that it's not going to be easy, but through implementation of innovation and clean technologies and rethinking agriculture, transportation, and lifestyle, we need to fundamentally decrease our carbon footprint as a civilization, as a nation, and as individuals. We've lost far too much time already indulging climate change deniers, but he gives us hope and action plans. In addition to being an award-winning actor, producer, and director, Don Cheadle was writing books about human rights crises in Africa when few were listening. And for years, his activism is extended to climate change as well. In his spare time, Don has served as a UN ambassador in the UN's environmental program and received a Nobel Peace Summit Award. Here's a short video to set the stage for the conversation between Bill Gates and Don Cheadle.
In a typical year, the world emits over 51 billion tons of greenhouse gases. And as we keep doing that, the consequences for human life will be catastrophic. When I first fell in love with computers as a teenager, they were enormous, expensive, and only the government and big companies could afford them. But my friends and I became obsessed with a wild idea. What could we do if there was a computer on every desk? And now the wild idea is quite tame. Billions of people not only have computers on their desks, but even in their pockets. Now the world needs another breakthrough. In fact, it needs many breakthroughs. We need to get from 51 billion tons to zero while still meeting the planet's basic needs. That means we need to transform the way we do almost everything. Our commitment to developing these innovations will mean the difference between a future where everyone can live a healthy, productive life and one where we're constantly dealing with the human and financial crises at a historic scale. Entrepreneurs and investors have to build new businesses and change existing businesses to get these solutions deployed. Government leaders have to enact new policies that drive the market for clean energy. And advocates have to keep their voices loud to hold all of us accountable for rapid progress. Avoiding a climate disaster will be one of the greatest challenges humans have ever taken on. Greater than landing on the moon, greater than eradicating smallpox, even greater than putting a computer on every desk. Now, my basic optimism about climate change comes from my belief in innovation. It's our power to invent that makes me hopeful.
How are you doing, Bill?
Hey, Don.
Good to see you. I want to say good morning. Thank you to the Los Angeles World Council and Writer's Bloc for that introduction. I'm Don Cheadle, and welcome to this conversation that Bill and I are going to have on his new book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, the Solutions We Have and the Breakthroughs That We Need. Today, we're going to hear from Bill on his path to climate work and his decision to write this book, before we're going to move on to some audience questions. But right now, I'd just like to say welcome. Thank you for joining us, Bill. I really enjoyed the book. It's incredibly readable and digestible, and I appreciate how you take this subject matter and break it down so it's accessible to the layman. And you use terminology and references that allow us to connect to this and really understand our place in this. So again, thank you. So I'm going to do my best Ed Bradley Jr. Impersonation. I've got a pen, I've got my questions written down. I want to make sure I get this right. This is a very important subject. So I'm just going to launch right into the first question. Great. So most people know me as an actor. They know you as the founder of Microsoft, a philanthropist focused on global health and development. But they also likely think of the two of us as being people who have wealth in excess of our need, compared to the regular citizen. And we have disproportionate carbon footprints. And that's something that you actually hit on in your book. So my question, I guess, is why should anybody listen to you and me when it comes to discussions about climate change?
Well, certainly, given the success we both have, there's a huge responsibility for us to look at the inequities that are out there and devote both our resources and our time, and to the degree people are willing to listen to us, our voice, to try to bring down these inequities. That's something that I think we both believe in very, very strongly. It's absolutely fair to say that my carbon footprint is higher than almost anybody else's. And I'm already speaking out a lot about global health. So why, should I speak out about another issue, and why should people listen? The reason that, really the thing that drew me into this was spending time in Africa and seeing that those countries deserve to have what we take for granted. They deserve to have lights at night and air conditioning. But I also saw that the climate is already hurting the farmers there, causing their annual productivity to be lower, causing there to be years where their crop completely fails, leading to malnutrition and instability. And so as I was seeing that, in parallel, I was seeing that young people are starting to care and speak out about climate, and that there's this ambitious goal. And so what came together for me was saying, we need a plan, and could my experience in the world of innovation help me to craft some things, write some things down that'll help us bring together a plan? Because without a plan, we're not going to get there. This is not an easy thing to get done, but it's not impossible.
Well, that's your optimism. We'll speak about that later, and it's necessary. And maybe optimism isn't even the right word, but it's something that has to be stronger, as you said, keeping the voices loud, and the activism has to continue. So it's actionable. I think a lot of times people think of optimism as a sort of a stasis, and it's just a state of being, but without work and without movement, it doesn't do anything. So thank you. My next question, so we're still fighting a global pandemic, which is great that in this book that's so current, that's a part of the book, which I was like, how fast did Bill write this thing? But well done to include that. So why do you think this is the right time to turn to climate? Why is this the right time for your book to come out?
Yeah, so my journey in climate, as I said, started with what I was seeing in Africa, and I was very naive. So I started studying it In 2010, I took some action. I gave a TED Talk, not as famous as my 2015 pandemic TED Talk that said we're not ready for the pandemic, but talking about climate and innovation. Then in 2015, I went to the Paris event, which was a great milestone for climate. One reason was that the discussion of R&D budgets in innovation came up there, and that's where I committed to create investments in innovation called Breakthrough Energy, and that over the last 5 years has gone very, very well. The timing for the book came as I saw that the younger generation cares about the issue, and that's really something. Even during this pandemic, where you would have expected people to get very short term and not think about something who the dramatic effects are decades away, you tend to pull in. But that hasn't happened here for the advocates, which I congratulate them. I didn't have anything to do with making that come together, but now I'm joining that and making sure that the sort of technical elements of the plan are as strong as possible. I was going to come out last year, but then the work of the foundation and the uncertainty of the pandemic was so strong that I pushed it back and did a pretty big revision to bring it up to date. Fortunately, we elected a president who cares about this issue and has rejoined the Paris Accord. There's a big climate event that then one since Paris that'll be in the UK and Glasgow, Scotland later this year, and a lot of money to build back after the pandemic in Europe, in UK, and the US has this climate theme. And so this is a big year for climate. And so even though I have a lot to say about making sure that we equitably end the pandemic and that we prepare so that when the next one comes, we're better off. But I decided it was so much is going on this year to lay a foundation for the 30-year plan that bringing the book into that dialogue was very timely.
And as you say, the youth, the young people pushing that. And I think we can look at many different issues, not just in this country, but around the world. And it's often the youth that are leading the charge and, giving the energy to continue the movements in that way. So I think it's great. And if there can be a real reciprocity and a synergy between you and finding ways to amplify and work with the youth, that'll continue to move this forward. So, kudos. Let's talk for a minute about the scale of the problem and the cost if we don't act. Climate change is already driving conflict around the world. We take Syria, for example, where the severe drought drove farmers to abandon their crops and move into the cities. UNHCR estimated that the crisis displaced nearly half of all the Syrians, and that the civil war that followed has killed hundreds of thousands of people tragically. Do you think this is an outlier, it's an extreme circumstance, or is this a harbinger? Is this what we have to look forward to, regrettably, if we don't deal with this problem?
Yeah, no doubt it's a harbinger, because as you emit more CO2, the temperature goes up. As the temperature goes up, the ability to farm, particularly near the equator, starts to degrade, and that creates huge instability. And decades from now, that will lead to migration that will make the Syrian civil war look very, very small. And so we have to, with climate, as hard as this mitigation is, that is bringing the emissions down to zero, at the same time, we owe it to these developing countries to help them with adaptation, help them with better seeds, help them with aid so that they can afford irrigation in some cases. There's a lot of ways that the ill effects can be limited, and that means that you won't get that instability, which is the worst thing possible. As we get towards the end of the century, climate problems will be killing over 5 times as many people per year as the peak of the pandemic. And so, as sad as the pandemic is, it really should wake us up to, we need government to invest on our behalf to avoid big problems. These problems sadly tend to hurt the people most in need. You know, the pandemic, I wouldn't have expected in advance that people of color would disproportionately suffer the way they have. And, you know, we're still, you know, trying to understand that and trying to offset that. Climate is like that. You know, I got to relook at the Years of Living Dangerously last night, and you know, the episode where you're meeting with farmers, even in California, who are already seeing those drought effects. You know, the big rich farmers are you know, not subject to that because they can finance through the tough years, or you know, do more irrigation. So this is not only a very bad thing, it's a very unjust thing that the countries that contributed the most are the ones, the least, are the ones that will suffer the most.
And disproportionately affecting those who have the smallest effect on it, not only globally, but also in this, I mean, worldwide, but also in this country, specifically locally.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's a good dovetail into my next question, which is about last year. And in 2020, we saw this global awakening around race, around racial injustice. And sort of to piggyback on what you were just answering, do you see a thread between the fight for racial justice, the pandemic, and the fight to save our species and others from the climate crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. If you live in the north, if you're wealthy, if you have air conditioning, climate's going to take a long time to affect you in a direct sense. You won't be able to visit coral reefs or you know, see lots of beautiful natural ecosystems, but the dire effects are the poorest countries and the poorest in the rich countries, which overwhelmingly includes people of color. And you know, the George Floyd incident was tragic. The fact that the pandemic affects particularly Black households more than other households, you know, that's really tragic. Hopefully it is a wake-up call that, you know, we have to double down on these things. We can see that domestically, we can also see it globally. You know, Africa is the continent that's got huge challenges for the future. They still have big population growth. Climate change, particularly around the Sahel, will be worse there. We never got the basics in terms of food and health solved properly. And yet, if you look at where babies are being born, there's a shift where the rich countries are actually shrinking, and the big population growth, going from 1 billion to 3 billion, is there in Africa. And so it's got an international dimension and a domestic dimension, that the fact we don't see these deficits, you know, we're not there, whether it's in the poor communities, and we're not there, you know, in the Sahel, seeing those farmers who are suffering. We try to use digital tools and great series like Years of Living Dangerously to raise the awareness, but there's so much more to do. You have to make people feel bad about what's coming and about these inequities. You don't want to overdo it, because you want to also engage them with a sense of hope.
Well, I think that's the balance to strike. I mean, you say we're not there, and it's about, you know, to coin a phrase from a movie that came out last year, when they see us. You know, so there is definitely a need to continue to ring that bell, and obviously people with a big platform and big voices and big microphones and the ability to raise the din are necessary in that space to have those places be seen, not only across the planet, but right here at home, in communities at home, in cities and states across our nation, where people who are disproportionately suffering from these effects are the people who have done the least to contribute to them. So let's keep ringing that bell for sure. So this is another good, we keep moving deftly toward our next, the next question. So I'm on the board of the Solutions Project, which is an organization that addresses climate crisis by funding and amplifying the stories of Black, Indigenous, immigrant women, other people of color that are creating their own innovative solutions on the front lines of climate change. Now, in the theory of change that you lay out in your book, do you see these frontline sheroes and their solutions playing a part? And what can they expect to learn from your book? And how can you see yourself perhaps throwing in, amplifying these voices of these frontline visionaries who are dealing with the effects of climate change day to day and creating for themselves ways in which to combat this? How can we support and amplify them?
Yeah, I don't know the solutions group in particular,
Project.
but it sounds
Yeah,
like
right, yeah.
I will. It sounds great because you talked about two things there. One is the visibility of the problem, and we've got to be endlessly creative, because unless we have this as a top priority every year for the next 30 years for all of the rich world governments, we won't achieve this ambitious goal. And so stories, not just statistics. I'm good at statistics, so I rely on others like yourself
Right.
to get in and tell these in terms of human stories. Also, particularly in adaptation, the front line is where the action is. Trying out a new seed, educating a farmer, maybe being able to use the mobile phone to get advice about when to plant. Women's groups that organize savings so that you can buy fertilizer and share best practices. So much of adaptation can be done on the front line. The mitigation, that is getting rid of these emissions, getting rid of the coal plants, there we do have to draw governments in, scientists in. So we've got to pursue these things in parallel. Frontline understanding that both motivates us and we empower those people, but also large scale, government driven, billions of dollars in R&D and deployment, because we're saying that, by 2050, a lot of the infrastructure, the way we make power, cement, steel, a lot of those things will have to have been changed. So it's a pace of change faster than we've ever been able to do prior to now.
Yeah, and I think, we're talking about Texas. We look at the examples today, I mean, good day, bad day, we joined the Paris Accord, the Paris Agreement, we're back in that good day. And then we're seeing sort of exactly what you're talking about, the need to upgrade, to innovate, to figure out the ways that we get energy, how we create these places, the land that it takes. I mean, I love the ways that you go into your book about thinking about not just the things that we need to do with solar, with wind, with water, but it's like, where are they going to be? Where do you actually put that? If you don't have the right topography, you can't do certain things. If you don't have the right land mass available to the cities or states that you're talking about, it mitigates your ability to do certain things. So I like how your book brought in all the different focuses from all the different bins that sort of all have to work together. I mean, it presents a huge challenge when you think about it logistically, like how is that actually going to be accomplished? But I think you also lay out some, ambitious but necessary goals and how to get there and how to achieve that. And yeah, it's going to take, it's an all hands on deck kind of situation for sure. I'm going to move into the next question. So how do you, now a little bit about Bill. So how do your two other lives, as a tech visionary, a philanthropist, how do they tie into the work, your climate change work? And does it give you in particular, do you believe, a point of view on the massive challenge that very few others have? I mean, you're one of a kind in many, many ways. And does that allow you, from your perspective and from your work, you think, to give you a greater insight than most people would have?
Well, I've certainly been very, very lucky that, my first career, the Microsoft career, that the dreams we had about the magic of software and the internet came true even more than we expected. And so that does make me an optimist, that if you back great scientists and engineers over a period of decades, they'll often surprise you with what can get done. Moving into global health, that's another career that my wife and I, feel that, amazing things have happened. The childhood death rate has been cut from over 10 million a year now to about 5 million a year. And a lot of that is vaccines that we and other partners, including governments, help fund. And so that's even faster a reduction than we would have expected. So I bring my kind of optimism and the view of, analyze the problem in a deeply numerical way, which, and this means looking at all those sources of emissions and saying, wow, zero means you've got to tackle all of them, not just the easy ones. So that's kind of my systems thinking. The green premium is kind of my economic thinking of, okay, what stands in the way? When you call India in 2050 and say, please do it all green, cement, steel,
Right.
Are they likely to say yes? Or are they likely to send us trillions that, we're not going to be able to do? And so, their emissions alone would still be very, very significant. I have to be humble though, because, I've never worked on, power plants and,
Right.
I'm a student. I've done a lot of reading about these areas. I've been very lucky. Experts, will sit and talk with me and help straighten me out on these things. But it's kind of new territory, and it's hard to predict how fast the innovation will go. This group I created, Breakthrough Energy Ventures,
Yeah,
there
speak
are
about
40.
That's great. It's a great group. Yeah.
So there's some 40 great companies, and whenever I look at that portfolio and the new ones that now we have the second fund, we'll do another 40. I do, I see the path where creating innovation and then creating demand for those innovations, can get us to where, for many categories, there is no extra cost, there is no green premium.
Well, yeah, and the green premium concept, we're going to get to that too. That's very interesting. And again, a digestible way in which you sort of break down how you think about not just the effect that a product has or that manufacturing has, but the complete cost from inception to its death, so to speak, of what that cost is on the climate and how to like sort of extract that evil. For those in the audience who haven't yet read the book, what's the reality of the situation that we're facing? And who are those that are facing the greatest threats today? And do you think there's a way that we can effectively address climate change in a way that solves for other crises, the economic inequality, we spoke about racial injustice, health disparities? For the pessimists that are watching, why is it not too late?
Well, it's if we let the temperature go up and up and up, the effects are worse and worse. And because CO2 stays in the atmosphere for thousands of years, that's why it's basically the sum of all those CO2 emissions over time. And so to stop the increase, you've got to get down to zero. And that's very daunting, because it means every area of emission. And one of the things, emissions, the two numbers I really emphasize are 51 billion, which is the total number of emissions, and then this goal of getting to zero by 2050. Maybe quickly, if we can put up the slide that shows the different areas of emissions, because when people talk about climate, of these 5 areas on this nice pie chart, I love pie charts, there's 2 that there's broad awareness. So the fact that when we make electricity with coal and natural gas, that's a lot of emissions, shows up here, 27%. People know that. When we drive cars and use gasoline, people know that's a significant source of emission. And so in both of those, they see electric cars, the price is coming down. Eventually, the price won't be much higher, so that's the green premium progress on transportation. And then you have solar and wind on electricity. But the 3 other areas here, you've got agriculture, including cows. You've got heating and cooling buildings, which we do a lot with natural gas. And then finally, the last category, which is actually the biggest of all, I think there's very low awareness because we don't visit steel plants or cement plants. We kind of take for granted it's always there, very cheap, and yet those are over 31% of emissions is coming out of that area. And so we need a plan for each of these things, you know, and we not only need that plan, but we need to take these industries, which are all over the world with many, many, many plants, and we actually have to change basically all of those plants in that 30-year time frame. So it is very daunting when you know, look at the entire scope. But you know, I don't want to discourage people. I do want to tell people who think it's easy that they're wrong, or people who don't think it's important that they're wrong, but also the people who think it's impossible that it's wrong, while backing it up with the incredible importance of getting this right.
Yeah, I mean, and when you look at that 31%, I think that is probably the most challenging of all of them, because those others you can see a way to get through. But it's like, are we going to stop building buildings? Are we going to stop, you know, paving roads? Are we going to stop? So if that's not going to stop, and especially when we talk about developing countries and, you know, wanting somehow them to not participate in the same thing that the richest countries in the world have is unreasonable and also not and objectionable on a level of parity and fairness. But yes, if we don't have governments involved, if we don't have strong advocacy and innovation, it's like that 31%. When I was looking at the book, I was like, wow, that wedge of the pie is really kind of the trickiest. So green premiums, you teed that up. That's central in the book. Can you explain what it is, why it's important, and how does a green premium account for costs from polluting industries that, you know, companies that right now they're not paying that, and its effect on healthcare, the increasing economic devastation from climate crisis, even lives lost?
Right. So as you say, the you know, when we run a coal plant, it not only contributes to climate change, but it contributes to local pollution. And we were very slow to realize that the rates of asthma and other negative effects were very strong there. And sadly, those plants and a lot of that pollution was disproportionately in poor communities. So the air and the water was causing health problems, and we've just developed the awareness of that. So we should have been, you know, regulating those coal plants or getting rid of them earlier. The doing things the green way, though, in some cases costs a lot more, and that's what I call the green premium. And I've got a slide here that gives two examples, one where we've got a fairly low green premium and one where it's very high. So for the electric car, when you're trying to make that decision, the electric car, you pay more up front, your range isn't as good, and you worry about the time it takes to charge and can you find a charging station. But the good news is that cost is not that much higher today. And as more people choose to buy electric cars, there'll be innovation, you know, better batteries, more charging stations. And so we can see that in the next 10 to 15 years, as these improvements take place, that green premium will actually go to zero. And that's why you can see somebody like General Motors saying, hey, we're not even going to make gasoline cars in 2035 because we think we'll be to the point where telling everybody to buy an electric car is preferable, even without having to subsidize that because of the green benefits.
And just to be clear, I'm sorry, Bill, to interrupt. Just to be clear, that premium is what you're talking about is the cost on top of what the normal cost would be, correct?
Yeah, I should be more clear. Yeah, you take the cost of doing it the green way, and you subtract out the cost of doing it the current way, which has the negative side effects. And that delta, you know, so for the electric car, the 15%, for cement, it's almost double the price because a ton of cement is very
Yeah.
cheap, $125 or less. And every ton of cement you make, you get a ton of carbon emission. And so that one we're very far away. And yet, saying to India when they're building basic shelter, pay twice as much, I think they're going to tell us no. So, let's get some brilliant people, some of which will be dead ends, but if we get enough to show us how to make green cement, but with a very small, ideally for many categories, zero green premium.
Well, and I think that's something also that you hit on in the book, which is another big challenge, is that the cost, that it's so cheap to do things in many ways the way that we're doing them now compared to doing it in a green way, and that those that can afford it can obviously take that hit, but like we're talking about, those in developing countries, those who are on the poor scale, even within our country, can avail themselves of those technologies. So how we have to influence legislation and push for more people to be able to take advantages of those things is going to be another big challenge. And it's like, yeah, how do people get around cheap? I mean, that's something that across the globe, that every human being is trying to find that deal. So that's one of these big challenges too that we're facing, that you lay out. When you're speaking with global leaders about climate change, what specific things are you asking them to do? And how encouraged are you that the world can come together to solve the climate crisis? And how are you, as a global leader in technology, business, new philanthropy, how are you influencing your peers and bringing them into the fold?
Yeah, I think this responsibility of those who are well off applies very strongly here. So, the companies that are doing very well as part of their citizenship, we'll be asking them to, as they're building new buildings, to be a pioneering customer for green cement and green steel. For the tech industry, they have ambitions to make their data centers completely green, and so they can be pioneering customers for energy storage solutions that are not mature and will cost them a bit extra, but we need them to lead on that. Over time, we are asking, people who can to stretch and buy, an electric car, to buy the artificial meat, and that's catalytic to bringing those products so that they become affordable by everyone. The private sector has got to be involved in this, but the private sector alone, that wouldn't be enough. You've got to have the government policy. I do worry in the US, if we're not able to make this a bipartisan issue, that if you have 4 years where you're going full speed and then 4 years where you're not, for people who invest billions in cement and steel plants or car factories, it's very hard for them to see the right policy signals if you don't have at least the core of the goal and the tactics constant over this 30-year period. So Europe has been serious about climate, year in and year out, and they're kind of saying to the US, boy, you were gone for 4 years. And I think that's legitimate. We have to get young people of both parties to have a chance to see this problem, think about this problem, and decide whether, as part of their moral presence, thinking about things beyond their own individual success, this is one that you get a unanimity that you care, even though you can disagree about the tactics to solve it.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if we're looking at this scientific question as something that depends on what party you're in, whether you can support it or not, that is a huge hurdle to get over. And hopefully we can put some things in place, that this administration can put some things in place that can start to actually prove, and we can start to see actual results, because human beings are slow to act on things that they cannot see a direct effect to their lives. It's hard for us to project and think about something that feels like a long way off. We're immediate. We have an immediacy issue. We want to see change that we're enacting now. We want to see things move now. And this is a slower arc, and it's something that's kind of far off. I mean, 30 years isn't that far away. Especially the older we get, 30 years starts to feel like tomorrow. But you hope that people can sort of have an understanding of what's coming down the pipe. I think we're going to shift to some audience questions right now, Bill.
Right.
Okay, Jorge asks, what do you think of nuclear energy? Nuclear energy as an option to energy transition?
Yeah, I see it's very, very likely that we may actually need nuclear. We can clearly drive the renewables up to like 80%, and we have to grow the electric sector because it's going to take over the energy provision of cars and heating, and so it's going to have to be almost 3 times as big. So a lot of wind and solar and a lot of transmission, so that if you get a cold front in the Midwest like we have right now, that you can get the power from other parts of the United States and move it around the country, because the wind is always blowing somewhere, and it's going to be less cloudy if you can draw on solar from many locations. However, when you have a really extreme weather event, to maintain reliability, we either need a miracle in energy storage, that we can
Innovation
store
again. Yeah.
20 times as much as today's batteries can, and so we can't count on that. Or we need a source of electricity that is both green and not weather dependent, and nuclear would fit that role. Now, nuclear has a lot of detractors. It's too expensive. We've had safety problems. We've got waste. We've got proliferation. And so we need a new generation of reactor that the economics and the way that the safety is guaranteed are very different. And so the US government's funded several companies, including one I'm very involved with called TerraPower. So over the next 5 years, we'll do this demo plant. So I hope people are open-minded that, if it's a big improvement on all those dimensions, that it may need to be part of the solution for the US having this completely green grid, but it stays reliable and it stays cheap.
Well, and again, something that you talk about in the book, and that's clearly at the center of who you are, innovation. And this idea that you have to really lean into that. And also that's something that you talk about, which is tricky for people to have, is especially people who are attached to their money, an appetite for seeing things, fail, not being risk averse, being willing to, as you talk about in the book, back ventures that don't come to fruition sometimes, but it's still the right play. It's like, how do you encourage that in entrepreneurs? How do you encourage that in people who are always thinking about the bottom line?
Yeah, I've lost a lot of money in various battery companies, but it looks like QuantumScape will be successful. At least I'll get some of that back. But overall, I'm only doing it to help with climate. Whatever's left over from the climate work, of course, can go into global health, where every dollar is a very big deal. For $1,000, we can save an additional life. So I think of money as very scarce, but climate is so urgent that I put several billion into it to date, and I'll do that again. And I am encouraging. It's great that other leading figures, Elon Musk just did a carbon cap challenge, as well as the great contribution Tesla's made to electric cars. Jeff Bezos has a big fund, and so hopefully there's this trend that those people will step up, and we'll work together on some things. We can disagree on some things. You probably need about 10 companies trying to make a breakthrough to have a probability of one succeeding. And so, in some areas like cement and steel, we have to increase the level of activity. We've done better on renewable power generation, electric cars, than those other areas of emissions. And adaptation is the thing that we've done the worst on. Even the money to improve those seeds to help that subsistence farmer, that's less than $1 billion, and it's got to be over $2 billion a year to make the progress they deserve.
Are you seeing people that maybe aren't as famous as Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk that we may not even know of? Are they throwing in? Are people reaching out to you saying, "Okay, Bill, let's do this. How can we do this?" Are you feeling that there's an accretion and things are moving forward in that regard?
Yeah, there's some of that. You know, to raise our second $1 billion fund, it was very straightforward, and we have over 20 individuals that are contributing to that. Now, these are people who are wealthy, and so they can afford to take the risk.
Right.
You know, getting the corporations on board to pay for high quality offsets, that's just beginning. But there I'm seeing a pretty good response. I would say the climate movement, it's fair to say that the last 20 years, it was a small enough movement that now is the time that we need to be way more ambitious to, you know, to turn to every company and saying, okay, what are you buying? You know, what are your skills? How can you help out with this? It's hard if you're a steel or cement company because, you know, people want an inexpensive product. Even if you're a utility, the Utility Rate Commission doesn't like you to use expensive techniques, which are going to drive up the electric bills. And so the fact that this political debate, at least on the Democratic side, was the first one that climate was a huge topic, even with a special meeting on, I hope that's a sign of not just a wave, but, you know, a constant.
Yeah, right. I have a question from Emma. She's a high school student. She runs an environmental club at her school. She's asking, what is the best way that students can help the cause, especially during this pandemic?
Yeah, well, for every individual, you have sometimes three things. You've got your political voice and your ability to educate other people. You know, both parties. You get extra credit if you convert people who think differently on other issues. You've got your voice as a consumer. When you buy a car, when you buy a burger, where there's Impossible Beyond is a choice on the menu. Everything you buy, you'll be able to get data about, is there a more green alternative to what you normally buy, and the companies will see that, and that'll drive them to improve. Finally, you know, your parents work somewhere, and you know, you can challenge them. Is their company stepping up in whatever its skills are, or whatever its purchasing power is, to kind of lead the way? And so, you know, awareness is the big thing, and young people seeing the difficulty, that's kind of a new piece, and you know, hopefully it catches on as almost a common sense thing that this is the cause of that generation.
Yeah, and again, it's great that you talk a little bit about you and your son touring these different facilities. What does he say to you about this? He's clearly engaged. How has he got his foot on the gas, so to speak? Are you guys still doing your tours of power plants and things?
Well, the pandemic has interrupted our learning about those things. Yeah, we've gotten to go to coal plants, you know, sewage plants, toilet paper plants. It's kind of the physical economy. It's amazing, the history of all those inventions, and you know, it's very energy intensive. You know, my son actually made me quite modest. He said, "Dad, are you sure you're the right one to write this book?" You know, my friend Warren Buffett said, "Boy, are they going to go after your carbon footprint?" So you know, it's good advice to me, but you know, I may not even be around for 2050, and you know, that I'll be 95 by then. And so, you know, when I talk to all my children about hey, this is something you're going to have to pick up and carry forward. And of course, in your own way, maybe you're not as much pushing the technology piece, but that's got to be an element of the solution.
Yeah. Okay. We have a question from, I hope I don't mangle your name. Apologies in advance. Satya Narayan. The question is, climate change is affecting farmers, yes, but farming practices, they're affecting climate change. So how do we balance this delicate situation between what they're doing and how what farmers are doing is affecting the crisis?
Yeah, so there are techniques, like no-till and rotating crops in that preserve the carbon content of the soil. And the carbon content is very important to a farmer. If you lose that carbon content, not only is it bad for the environment, it's bad for you growing more crops. And so the US over time put aside water usage. The farming practices have gotten more sustainable. In places like Brazil, where people want to grow more soy or have land for beef grazing, there's a lot of forest being cut down. In Indonesia, that's palm oil plantations being built there. And so, those poor countries, the idea that, okay, in the short run, that may create a gain, but there's such a cost to doing it. In fact, will the Amazon forest even exist 20 years from now if it's under this pressure? How we use the satellite measurement data and how, can outsiders help the government, or is that viewed as interference? How do you get a level of monitoring that the compliance is good? The land use work has not been as successful as we'd like. And so slash and burn farming is tough. The better seeds will help a lot in that they'll not only be climate adapted, but they'll be more productive. And so the pressure to go and use more land will go down because you're able to get enough off of a smaller farm.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for your questions, everyone. We're gonna have one more question, then we're gonna wrap this up. I appreciate your time, Bill. Thank you very much. It's been a great conversation. What do you think are the toughest policy challenges, both in the U.S. and globally? And how do you think corporate leaders who support climate change can collaborate more effectively with labor unions, racial justice advocates, affordable housing, community health, and environmental advocates to support, bold climate and green economic policy?
Yeah, there's a lot of different communities there that often have been separated. As part of my climate work recently, I've met people in this environmental justice movement, and actually President Biden appointed an expert, Dr. Martinez, to represent the issues there. Overall, there is synergy, as we're getting rid of coal plants, as we're making cars not noxious, or buses, that'll help out all communities. But if you're not intentional, sometimes the policies get the bad stuff near, the Superfund sites and things near to where the poor communities are located. So bringing that type of sensitivity, that was new to me, and so I put the time in to think about that. The corporate sector, I do see a lot of pressure. BlackRock is a big finance investor group, and they're saying, hey, if a company's not pretty strong on their climate policies, they'll even say, hey, we don't think you should invest in that. So that movement is getting better at measuring, okay, there's a term greenwashing versus what's really legitimate there. And I think every year we'll get smarter about what really counts. Who's writing real checks? Are they going against the things that make a difference? And some of the efforts I'm funding hopefully will give scorecards that the quality of that gets better over time. The government role is the central role. And, you know, so private sector, absolutely, philanthropy, but, you know, when the benefits of getting rid of these greenhouse gases is kind of deferred. And so sending the signal that do the R&D and buy those green products now, you know, the model of the electric car, which, you know, it's got a nice tax credit on it, and that's helped drive that volume up. Solar and wind, even though the price are coming down, that subsidies is driving that volume out. So we have some good examples. We need to now apply them to things like storage and industrial things. And that's why the Biden administration appointing very smart people and coming in with a real priority for climate change. This will be the first time they actually do look at all those areas. And of course, we're talking with them a lot about advice on that. And so, you know, we're, you know, people will see a lot of visibility of this November event and all those constituencies hopefully coming together around this. You know, I hope, you know, people are excited about the innovation and that, you know, the real metrics are coming in. This is going to be a field with a real plan and a real sense of what's going well. You know, and that's in a sense, this is kind of the start of this 30-year countdown for those groups working together.
And hopefully, in historic, something that has not always been done, the people who are most greatly affected will actually have a seat at the table and be able to be part of the architects who talk about the necessary changes that affect them disproportionately. And that's very important. And I'm glad that we've continued to make that a focus of this discussion. And this has been great, Bill. Again, I really love the book. It lays everything out very succinctly, and the challenges that we face and the advocacy that's going to be necessary. And I'm glad that you're leading the way in that regard. And we appreciate you, and thank you for taking the time to do this. I'd also like to thank the Los Angeles World Affairs Council and Writer's Bloc again for hosting this. To our viewers from LA, San Francisco, and wherever you may be, we want to say thanks again, and thank you, Bill. And thank you. Yeah, great to see you. And we'll offline, and I'll hip you to the Solutions Project and some other great places that we can talk about.
Fantastic.
Great. All right. And thanks, Kim. I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Bill and Don, for such a superb conversation about how we all can work together to avoid climate disaster. We so much appreciate your time today, and I hope you sell millions of books and get this going in the right direction. So thank you all so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kim. Bye, Bill.